Greenland, the greatest lie in real estate history? We're about to dive into a story. It's about a name, an island, and what might just be the most successful and, well, the most tragic branding campaign of all time.
So why is this giant island device called Greenland? I mean, it sounds like the start of a bad joke, right? You look at a map, you see this huge white blob at the top of the world, and someone decided to call it Greenland. It makes zero sense. Or maybe it does?
Okay, let's try to wrap our heads around just how massive this place is. Greenland is 20 times bigger than South Korea, but get this, its population is 1,000 times smaller. We're talking about the biggest island on the planet, and it's practically empty. This place isn't just an island, it's a total paradox.
All right, so to crack this mystery of the name, first we've got to get real about what this place is actually like. And let me tell you, that reality, it is unbelievably harsh.
I mean, just look at the stats. The ice sheet covering most of it is thousands of meters thick, and the average temperature inland, a bone-chilling -30 degrees Celsius. Yeah, that's about as far from green as you can possibly get. And really, it all boils down to this one number, 1%. Just 1% of this whole gigantic island has any grassland on it whatsoever. Now, you're going to want to remember that number, because that tiny little seed of truth, well, it's about to sprout into a massive lie.
So you have to ask, who in their right mind would try to build a dream on that measly 1%? Well, every great story needs a larger-than-life character, right? And ours is a fiery Viking who, believe it or not, had an incredible knack for marketing.
So, let me introduce you to Eric the Red. This guy lived more than 1,000 years ago. And yeah, just like his name suggests, he had fiery red hair and, let's just say, a personality to match. His biggest problem? That temper of his kept getting him exiled from pretty much everywhere he tried to settle down.
I mean, check out this guy's track record. First, he gets booted from Norway because his dad was mixed up in a murder. So he heads to Iceland. Then, what happens? A few years later, he gets into another fight, ends up killing a couple of guys, and boom, exiled from Iceland for 3 years. This is a man who is seriously running out of options, forced to sail west into totally uncharted territory.
And this is the pivot point. This is where everything changes. After spending 3 years exploring that frozen wasteland, Eric sails back to Iceland. He's desperate, right? He needs people to follow him, to build a new colony. He knows the truth. He knows it's 99% ice. But he's smart. He focuses on that tiny 1% sliver of green and gives his new discovery a name that's impossible to resist: Greenland.
Honestly, it was pure marketing genius. We're talking about a time way before ad agencies and social media, and Eric the Red pulls off one of the most effective branding campaigns ever. He wasn't just selling land, you see. He was selling a dream of a fresh, green start to a bunch of poor Icelandic farmers who had pretty much nothing to lose.
And the wildest part of this whole thing? It actually worked. I mean, it really worked. The lie totally took root, and just like that, a brand new chapter for the Vikings was underway.
So, in the year 985, Eric leads this huge expedition, 25 ships, all packed with people hoping for a better life. But the journey itself, wow, it was a brutal wake-up call. The fleet got hammered by these vicious storms. 11 ships just didn't make it. They were either lost to the sea or had to turn back. In the end, only 14 ships, with about 500 settlers, actually reached their promised land.
So how on earth did they survive? I mean, this clearly wasn't the green paradise they'd been sold. Well, they had to adapt. They hunted, and their absolute lifeline was trade with Europe. They would export these really valuable Arctic goods, stuff like walrus ivory, which was kind of like the hot commodity of the Middle Ages, and in return, they'd import things they absolutely could not live without, like wood, food, and tools. They were basically living on the edge of the known world, and everything depended on that connection staying strong. And for a while, a few centuries actually, the colony did more than just survive. It thrived, completely against the odds. At its peak, the Viking population there hit somewhere around 6,000 people. They were building churches, running farms. They created this totally unique European society right there in the middle of the Arctic. It was like the lie had actually become a reality. But as we're about to see, it was a very, very fragile reality. Because just as quickly as it all began, the story takes a really dark turn. The once bustling settlements, they fall silent, and the people, they just vanish.
Yeah, by the 1400s, the Greenland Vikings were gone. And I don't mean they just packed up and moved. They vanished off the face of the earth.
So the question is, what could possibly wipe out an entire society like that?
Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was like the perfect storm, a recipe for total disaster. First, the climate took a nosedive. The Little Ice Age began, which made their style of farming pretty much impossible. Then, their #1 export, walrus ivory, its value completely tanked once cheaper elephant ivory started coming out of Africa. That all-important trade link to Europe, it got choked off. And on top of all that, plague swept through. It was just one devastating blow after another until the whole system collapsed.
And this is where we find the real kicker, the most important lesson of the whole story. See, the Vikings weren't alone on this island. The Inuit people were there too. But here's the difference. While the Vikings stubbornly clung to their European way of life, a way that just wasn't working anymore, the Inuit had absolutely mastered the art of surviving in the Arctic. So when the climate changed and those ships from Europe stopped coming, the Vikings' rigid system just shattered. But the Inuit, who knew how to live with the ice, not just fight against it, they endured.
So, after all that, what's the big takeaway from this incredible story of marketing, survival, and ultimately collapse?
You know, it all comes full circle, right back to that name, Greenland. It was a promise, wasn't it? A promise of an easier life, a little piece of Europe transplanted to the Arctic. But a name can't change reality, and the reality was ice. The real lesson here wasn't about finding green fields. It was about learning to adapt to the world as it actually is, not just how you want it to be.
And that leaves us with one last, kind of chilling question, doesn't it? Think about it. 1,000 years ago, a society was dealing with a changing climate, a shaky economy, and being cut off from the rest of the world. They couldn't adapt, and they disappeared. It really makes you wonder, what is their story, frozen there in the Greenland ice, trying to tell us today?